The Wrathful God and the Biblical Witness, which is a study of the Bible. At least I got that correct this time round rather than fluffing it completely. Um, we are now online, both on YouTube and on Facebook. And
There are no viewers.
I know you're such a
There's one.
hello, single person who's just come on. How are you? Say hi to us. We don't bite. Well, no, we don't. So, what are we going to do? Well, we're continuing looking at the beginning of the Noah story. Yes, last week we got to the Noah story itself, and we actually got to look at the Bible. Ooh, hello, Karen. Good morning to you. So this week we're going to finish up visiting the list of literary types, the kind of things you find in the Bible. Yes, we are going to finish. Now, I must say that these are not exhaustive. They are the most common. They are the ones that you can find in various parts of the Bible rather than just some obscure thing that is unpronounceable, although we do have some rather unpronounceable ones
words.
today. Good morning, Vern. And there's 4 people, so please do say hi to us, and we will say hi back. Well, we can say hi anyway. We don't need to know who they are. Good morning. So we're going to do that. We're going to finish off the literary types, and then we are going to move forward. But we're going to do something of a review or a kind of overarching view of what we've done so far. And we're going to do this not only because it will show us just how far we've actually come. And good morning, Anne. Now, I say how far we've actually come. You may think we've hardly gotten anywhere. But we have. We actually have. And doing this overview will also embed, hopefully, what we've done more. And so, without any more ado, let's finish off those literary types by continuing with slide 1.
Symbols and types. Symbols are figures of representation in which one thing is used to suggest another. So the symbol is the literal object that conveys a lesson or a truth. And here are a few examples. The pillar of cloud and fire in Exodus 13 symbolizes God's glory and presence among his people. The blood mentioned in Leviticus 17 and in Deuteronomy 12 symbolizes the life of an animal or a human being. Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones, Ezekiel 37, symbolizes the judgment and restoration of Israel. The basket of summer fruit in Amos 8 symbolizes the end that would come in judgment. And it's interesting that the Hebrew words for summer fruit and end sound almost alike. So the ripe fruit is either consumed or spoiled as an apt symbol of judgment. Numbers 4, 7, 12. Colors, blue, purple, scarlet, white, and black, and metals, gold, silver, bronze, iron, are often used symbolically in Scripture. And now we move to types. These are prophetic symbols. A number of Old Testament people, events, and things are types that correspond to New Testament antitypes. Melchizedek was a type of Christ. You get that in Genesis 14, Psalm 110, and then the New Testament interpretation in Hebrews 7. David was a type of Christ, Psalm 22, 69, and the New Testament reference is Romans 15. Adam was a type of him who was to come. Romans 5, 14, and that is Christ, who is the type of him who is to come. The earthly tabernacle was a copy and shadow of the heavenly thing. Hebrews 8.
So, good morning, Bill. Good morning. It took me a while to get the typing going. Well, I'm glad you did, and it's good to have you here. All right, so we move on to the next word, which is, depending on who you are, it can be pronounced as in Sinidoche, Sinidoke, Sinidok.
Synecdoche.
Okay, whatever it is, it's this word. And in a Sinidoke,
Okay.
a part is used for the whole, or a whole is used for the part. Examples from John's Gospel 3:16, for God so loved the world. The world isn't being used in a kind of as just the planet itself, but it's to do with the people of the world. And it's really that straightforward.
Next, we're going to look at tragedy.
Sorry about that.
Oh my goodness. He didn't do that, did he? Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
You cannot beat the Bee Gees.
Oh, okay. Some of the protagonists in Scripture fell from a position of blessing to calamity. The narratives of their lives are tragic because of the disastrous change in their fortunes. There is a greatness about most of them that is marred by a fatal flaw in their character. This is why readers hope in vain that the story will turn out better than it does. In each case, the tragic protagonist faces one or more critical moral choices and fails. The consequence of this failure may not be immediate, but they inevitably bind him in a web from which he cannot escape. He is at once responsible for and victimized by his tragedy. In some cases, like Samson in Judges 13 through 16, the tragic hero gains insight from his suffering. Other biblical examples of tragic narrative
Tragedy.
are Adam and Eve in Genesis 3, Saul in 1 Samuel 9 through 31, and Solomon, 1 Kings 1 and 2 Chronicles 1 to 9.
Talking about Solomon leads us and segues us nicely into this next one, which is wisdom. And while wisdom appears in the literature of the Bible quite often, it's denoted more by the content than by the form. And it usually appears in the form of what's known as didactic poetry, or poetry that teaches principles about life. Now, most of this literature is to be found in the books of Job, which surprises many people that it's a wisdom book. Proverbs doesn't surprise people there. Ecclesiastes, again, that's not really a surprise, is it? Some of the Psalms, like Psalm 1, Psalm 37, Psalm 119, and much of the book of James can be also categorized as wisdom literature. Jeremiah 18:18 mentions three classes of spiritual leaders in Hebrew culture: priests, prophets, and the wise. Now, which kind of begs the question, if you're a priest, does that mean you're not wise? Don't answer that, Bill. So, Joseph, Abigail, Solomon, and Daniel are examples of those who possessed prudence and wisdom. Now, these people and people who are sort of deemed to be wise, they're observers of life. And the wise, because they do this observation, could give right answers in critical situations. They were highly practical rather than merely theoretical, which sometimes doesn't seem, when you think about wisdom and wise people nowadays, you think of like people who meditate or who, Confucius, he say, pithy sayings, you go, what? Whereas no, these are really practical people. The wise know the course of action that would lead to the desired results. And such sages analyze conduct and study the consequences of given actions. But wisdom is more than shrewdness or intelligence. It relates to a practical righteousness and a moral intelligence. And the key word that we need to use here for wisdom is the word, you're going to say this one.
Chokhmah.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a Hebrew word that literally means skill. So wisdom is the skill in the art of living life with each area under dominion, under the dominion of God. It's the ability to apply truth in the light of experience. The wisdom literature stresses that the basis for true success in skillful living is the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, fear doesn't mean, it means to have a right, true belief of who God is and respect. Yeah. Now, I use the word dominion, and in modern day Christianity, well, in a part of modern day Christianity, the word dominion means something completely different than what the Hebrew word meant. It does not mean domination, but it means responsible. That both God and humans are in partnership, with God lighting the way and the person responding to follow in that light. Now, this literary form is generally expressed in, and kind of better expressed in poetic terms, with poetry and song seemingly to be the better way of expressing inner truths. We do have in the modern day world some people who are really, really good at expressing spiritual truths in prose, but again, it does seem to be the thing that art is the way to express spiritual truths better. And we can kind of plug our nascent Advent group at this point, because we will be using art to discuss spiritual truths. There you go. That's how it works. Now, when it comes to what happens within the writings, the poetic writings of wisdom, they use a variety of techniques, including many we've come across through this literary terms dictionary, for want of a better word, such as parallelism, both antithetical and synthetic parallelism, and you'll find that in Proverbs. Numerical sequences, which has been talking about how numbers can be used, again in Proverbs. Alliteration in Ecclesiastes, and within the full spectrum of figurative language. And it's this that helps those books, those verses, those chapters to remain relevant to us, being in a different time and in a different culture. Which, when you think about it, is absolutely amazing, that we can read something which is several thousand years old and we can still say, oh yeah, this is speaking to me directly. It fits in with my experience of life. The proverb is a special feature of wisdom literature because it uses a comparison of or simple illustration to make a poignant observation on life. Proverbs are practical and concise. They don't go on. They are meant to be read slowly in small sections. These maxims are also meant to be easily memorized statements that are true to life, even though individual cases may differ. And Kit says, believe it or not, I'm asking for more words. Can you go back to dominion and its meaning? So important for our relationship to other creatures and to the earth. We'll actually be discussing this a bit more when we move forward, because yes, it really is an important word, and we'll be discussing it when we're talking about the creation story again.
And God giving man dominion over
and
creation.
Noah and what that means. So if you bear with us, if we don't do it justice, Kit, by the end of this, then let me know. We will try and deepen the meaning of that word. What's happened nowadays in certain segments of the church is that dominion has been used, they're called dominionists, where it's more to do with domain, and in how God has called certain people to act in a certain way, And it's really strange because the certain way that a lot of these people act who are dominionists is just unchristian. I mean, it's kind of violent, very argumentative, lacks love, compassion, very judgmental. It's very exclusive. You know, we are the ones and nobody else is. It kind of writes its own script in a way. Anyway, thanks for asking that question.
And now we come to a literary device called Zugma.
Zumba.
Zumba.
Zugma. Zumba is
That's the exercise.
yeah. I wish I could do that, but
Yeah.
it's just far too exhausting.
The term Zugma is used when a word modifies two or more words, but strictly refers to only one of them. One or more words must be supplied to complete the thought. For example, from the Greek, 1 Corinthians 14:34 says, "The woman should be silent."
The women. It's
The
not just
women.
singular.
Should be silent, for they are not permitted to speak. Rather, let them be in submission. In order to complete the thought, certain words have been added in the English translation. The woman should be silent, women should be silent, and then you add in the church, for they are not permitted to speak. Rather, let them be in submission, and then you add, as in fact the law says.
So what's happening there is that they try to put it within a context rather than women shouldn't speak full stop.
Ever.
In any place, in any time. It's just within the church because the law says so. But I don't know about you, but wow, what a contentious example upon which to end. But this is what happens with some places where you can take something out of context and, well, there you go.
Maybe we could look at that part of Scripture at some point, as it is a difficult saying, and that's what this study is really about.
Well, that it is. Yeah, it certainly is. Okay, we are now done with just some of the various literary types. This was not exhaustive, although you may be exhausted. We have been through quite a few of them. I didn't count them, but we've gone from A to Z. So
A to Z, yes.
A to Z. Zebra crossings. You call them crosswalks?
Crosswalks.
Yeah, yours makes more sense. Apart from stripes, I have no idea what a zebra crossing would mean. Oh, that's kind of
Okay, they have stripes like a zebra.
like a zebra.
Like a zebra, as I said.
Oh well. So we've included the most common words that just to give you a flavour of what it takes to read Scripture with integrity and to get the most out of it.
Imagine misreading poetry as a factual statement, or misreading a prophecy as plain history. You'd soon end up putting things out of Scripture that just are, you'll be putting things into Scripture that just are not there.
Well, all of this nicely segues into our study for today. We are revisiting what we've done and hopefully deepening the foundation we've built. So let's give it its proper title and let's call it Revisiting the Worldview of the Genesis Readers. Now, in today's world, the most important narrative for creation is the one developed through scientific research, and that is the Big Bang Theory. Now, just think about how ancient biblical writers would have used that information to formulate the biblical Genesis narrative. If they had all this information about the Big Bang Theory, how do you think it would sound? How do you think our Bibles would read? But just think about how we use it, how it has captured our imaginations. Yet, although it provides a theory for a primal cause, it does nothing to provide answers to the questions even the ancients were asking. So the ancients didn't have the information we now possess. They had their own way of formulating how things worked, but they still had questions, which is one of the very things that makes us human and which distinguishes us from the rest of the animal creation. Lest we forget, we are animals. So, although the shift for us when we look at the story of the Genesis is massive, for the people of the age, it wasn't. Instead of science being the central figure of the creation story, the ancient people put God at the center, a God who speaks things into existence.
The ancient Israelites, like most civilizations of that time, had little in the way of the scientific equipment we take for granted. What they did was see the universe as it appeared to them through everyday observation. The ancient Near Eastern people thought that rain came from an ocean above the sky, an observation which, for them, explained why the sky was blue. And the rain came down out of little holes that were in that dome that was above the earth. And added to the belief was that this ocean was the one that wrapped itself all the way around the earth. This was thought to be the case because it explained why deep wells always hit water. Their notion of the whole earth was based on the edges of their current maps. Maps which mostly consisted of what we would describe as today's Middle East.
Now, when it comes to the story of the flood, the narrative relies on this same ancient understanding of the world. As the firmament was believed to be a solid dome in the sky which held up the cosmic ocean in place, collapsed, and the fountains of the deep exploded upwards, the earth was experiencing a return to the watery chaos as was described in the very first verses of Genesis. So you've got the separation, then you get Cain and Abel, and then you get Noah, and then you get the reversal of creation. This was happening as a way of dealing with the chaos of sin. God returned the earth to chaos and then restored order with a restart or renewal of creation. Now, this idea of restart is something very familiar to us in the modern world. For how many times have we had to restart our computer when something has gone wrong, when the computer began to function incorrectly or errors were caused coming up on screen to just make everything go awry? But the story of the flood isn't about telling us the history of the world and the human's part in its downfall. The story of the flood isn't a treatise on scientific understanding of creation science and how chaos was fast-tracked by God. What the flood is about, and has already been said, is about answering the questions of our existence. And here they are. Boom. How did all of this come to being? Who are we, and why are we like we are? We can see all of this because of how the book of Genesis is written. The plot line, so to speak, isn't merely about creation, but is more about a movement from harmony, God's original plan, to disruption, what we now call the fall, to renewal, a new covenant relationship, to dislocation, the Tower of Babel.
And it is as it sounds. This is a story. More accurately, this is a narrative that is telling us something very important. We can see this when we see the play on words the Hebrew contains. Adamah, which means ground, and then the word or the name of the first human, Adam, which is a variation of that word for ground or dirt or dust. Both link where we come from, who also we also read that God saw that it was good. This is a value judgment. What God made was good. So if this is the case, and if human beings are created in God's image, as Scripture tells us, then guess what this means for us? It means that our actions are supposed to fit in with God's intent. The important word here is dominion. Dominion does not mean domination, it means responsibility. The text makes clear that God sees it as good that the plants, fish, birds, and all the other animals are to flourish. So when humans work to continue this flourishing, we are doing the good work of God. But when we are diminishing the planet and causing extinctions and removal of habitats, then not so good, is it? Even the notion of God resting is important. All things being equal, a creator God has no need for rest. But what this seventh day event tells us is that the Sabbath is an attempt to align human action with God's action. It reflects the harmony God intends for the world. From the get-go, humans are meant to work the earth or to keep it. The Hebrew word for keep is shamar, which means to care for, to watch over, to preserve, to protect. Within the Garden of Eden, God and humans abide together. The garden, though, contains two odd things. Two trees whose fruit have effect for different things. Question: why would God plant such trees? One answer: we don't know. A better answer: they are a plot device to explain something.
Simply put, God created us and endowed us with free will. Free will includes living within limits, or not. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil acts as a kind of limit buster. It isn't the eating of the fruit per se that brings about the knowledge of good and evil, it's the breaking of limits it represents. After eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, things fall apart. For knowing the difference between good and evil does not mean doing what is good. God assumes humans will reach beyond the limits again, and so reach for the fruit of the tree of life and thus assume immortality, and God stops this. After which, we are led into the story about Cain and Abel. Now the pair of us, didn't do anything about the story of Cain and Abel because although it fits in within the scope of what we're talking about, the movement from creation to flood, it just creates too many unanswerable questions.
And can you believe he said that?
Yeah, and even I can be turned off by that. I mean, my first words from birth were, why?
Why?
Why? Such an existential angst at such a young age. But there you go. Yeah, for example, here is an example of a question that we can't answer. Cain's offering wasn't pleasing to God. We're never told why, although that hasn't stopped many people trying to fill the gap. And I am not one of those people. I've just thought, huh? But the real reason we're not told is because, once again, it is not history. He says, not hitting the slide. What's going on? Oh, must be slide 26. Yes, it is. That's what happens when you don't read the number. Numbers are important, kids. So this isn't history.
This slide is brought to you by the number 26.
Yes. It is a narrative device to explain evil and murder in the world. God tells Cain that sin is lurking at the door, something to which we can all relate, and that Cain needs to try and control it. He didn't, or couldn't, or wouldn't. And again, we've all been there. Now, back in my school days, we used to, in English, we used to read quite a lot of novels, including novels by the author John Steinbeck. And one of the books that really, really caught my attention back in the day and really made me think was East of Eden. And when I read this, I zero knowledge of the Bible. I mean, I didn't even own one at that time. But it seemed to me that what John Steinbeck was saying is that there's only one question that people kind of have in front of them most of the time. And the question is, how do people respond when faced with the choice between good and evil in their lives, in their thoughts, and in society? And I think that's a really good question for us all to sort of ponder on, especially as we're going through these chapters.
And so now we move on to the flood.
Dun, dun, dun.
The flood story is God's response to the disillusionment of harmony into chaos. Genesis does not list all the animals that Noah gathers, although artists throughout the ages, quite erroneously, have filled the gap. When Noah and his family finally leave the ark, a rainbow appears, and we are told that the rainbow is a sign that God will never again send a flood. So, at its most basic, this is a story of
Got slightly before you then.
deliverance and renewal. If you look at the story more clearly, it becomes more troubling. And the major issue is this: it is God who brings about the disaster, which seems, at the least, inexplicable, and at its worst, the revelation that we have a monstrous, fickle God. After all, Genesis introduces God as the creator who speaks life into being. So, for God to send the flood means that the creator has become the destroyer, which makes no sense of the God in which we claim to believe. Perhaps part of the problem is that we focus almost entirely on Noah and his family and all the animals safely cocooned in the ark riding atop the waters. Genesis, though, takes a wider look at the people and the animals that drowned, and this is a terrifying question, and it requires us to ask, how could a creator God do such a thing? But as with most things biblical, there are no easy answers. Yes, being brave enough to ask the question does draw us more deeply into the story and moves us away from the children's book image that so often first comes to mind when we think of Noah and his ark.
Yeah, it's one of the problems, isn't it? We get fixated on certain views of things, like the incarnation, Christmas, baby Jesus, and for too many people,
that's it.
Yeah, baby Jesus never grows up.
So, when we ask the question, how could a creator God do such a thing, we realize God is more complex than we might first have thought. In chapter 6, verse 5, the story starts with, of all things, grief. To be more exact, divine grief. God created the world to be good, but what he sees humans have done is that they have given in to evil. In Star Wars terms, we went over to the dark side. Not only that, but evil has its own consequences. It doesn't build up, it destroys. It reverses the order of creation by bringing chaos out of calm. So, from this verse, we get the picture of God coming to regret he ever making human beings, and that is why he decides to hit the reset button on that.
I really badly wrote that sentence.
Yeah, that is really quite I had to do a little bit of on-the-fly editorial. Yet, this creation creates a dilemma for God, which adds another level of complexity for us and for our understanding of God. For him to get rid of all life would indeed turn God into the destroyer.
No, why is this a bad thing? Well, because within the context of the Bible, this God is massively different than the other gods that are around. Gods were local in other cultures. Gods were taciturn. They were very human, like the Greek pantheon of gods.
They were like superheroes.
Yeah, yeah, but they would get into fights. We heard from the Epic of Gilgamesh, whatever it is,
Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh. This, what happened. Gods killed each other. They sired children from humans. We had then the local gods be like the god of the wheat, the god of the rain, the god of the sunshine. This is what happened in Egypt with the Nile and the sun and everything, and eventually the king becomes the God himself.
The intermediary between the divine and the human.
Yeah. Whereas this God is completely different. This is the one God of all creation and everything. There are no local gods. They're all idols. Although we are made in His image, not He is made in our image. It's the other thing around. So this is something that needs to be answered. How do we do what we're doing? How do we believe? Well, this is where Noah comes in. When God tells Noah to build the ark and to save the animals, what we are seeing is destruction linked to renewal. And renewal provides a slim thread of continuity in the narrative. And just to remind you here, this is narrative, not literal history. It's a plot device trying to tell us something. And indeed, we've now given this slim thread a name, we being Bible scholars and theologians. For it's something God has done a few times throughout history. And we like to call it, because we have to give things names, remnant theology. That God maintains a faithful few that is to leaven the lump, so to speak. So, as a recap of this recap, God has created everything, plants, animals, birds, sea creatures, etc. And He saw that it was good. Humans were created, and because we were made in God's image, we were intended to continue in God's creative way by tending and caring for all that God deemed good. But because we were not willing to live within God's defined limits, we allowed evil into God's good creation, and that evil took over until it became a destructive, chaotic force. Now God directs Noah to tend to the well-being of creation by building an ark, not only to save himself, but to preserve and renew all the species of life on earth. The gift of the rainbow at the end of the story signals God's renewed commitment to the well-being of all creation. In chapters 9 through 13, God puts His bow in the clouds. 9 verse 13, God puts His bow in the clouds. This says God is a sign of the covenant between Him and every living thing, not just humans, but every living thing. The rainbow is a sign that God will never destroy the earth by a flood again. It is a sign to God's commitment for the well-being of all living things.
Did you catch something there? Very subtle. Father Andrew said that God put His bow in the clouds, and then concluded that the rainbow is a sign that God will never destroy the earth by flood again. Here, he made bow to equal rainbow. But in the Hebrew in which Genesis was written, the word used was kashet, the common word for the type of bow a warrior would use in battle. So in ancient art, we mostly see the bow depicted as a weapon. So by hanging His bow in the clouds, God is telling us that He is hanging up His weapon. It is a reminder that God's will for the earth is not conflict, but harmony, which equals life. But then the story continues. God may well be committed to peace and harmony, but people do not necessarily share that goal.
And there you have it for this week. And we've been really concise. I'm amazed. Yes.
Did that?
Yes, Kit. Did that help you with the definition of dominion? Yeah, so important for our relationship to other creatures and to the earth. It's kind of a fascinating study, almost all of its own. And when you consider what we've done with the earth and how we're in the process of destroying it, it's a pretty important thing. Stewardship is the basic word we use, but that has been sort of thinned out just to talk about our own possessions and what we do with them, really, isn't it? Maybe what the church does with what it has, but it's a real whole earth thing.
And the word dominion and its translation from Hebrew gives us the theological basis for ecological theology.
Yes, which again is a big thing. And they actually do courses on that now, I believe.
Yeah.
Did you have them in your day? It wasn't for me.
No.
Oh, Kit.
No.
Yes, thanks. And I see the dominion thread going through to the bow. The fact that God's covenants with all creatures reaffirms this understanding of dominion. Yes, exactly. So if you have any questions, we have a goodly amount of time. We've excelled in not being so wordy. Actually, we. I can tell you a story from a couple of Sundays ago now when apparently when you watch this with what's it called, subtitles,
Closed
captions, when it's me speaking, it's like St. Paul and his letters. They're just one run-on sentence. It just keeps going and going and going. No punctuation, no periods, nothing. Whereas when Father Lewis speaks,
it's orderly.
Yes. But, it's, what can I say? I put my finger upon my lips. Job-like.
St. Paul needed a good editor.
What are you saying?
Take those sentences and make them into sentences instead of run-on paragraphs.
Yes. Mind you, the Rite One service of communion in the Book of Common Prayer does a pretty good job of subclause after subclause after subclause. Oh, yeah.
It's a style of writing that we're not used to any longer.
And who told you that, Bill? Well, Bill, I think it was you and Kit who told me that during the announcements, yes. And I've got a really good kick out of that. And it's made me really, really self-conscious. You can tell, can't you?
And I told him he was just a run-on sentence.
Ooh! Kit, do you remember the Unicorn song by the Irish Rovers, I think? The darling little unicorns missed the ark, so of course they die in the flood. One of the few accounts that focuses on the grief. Yeah, one of the wonderful things in Judaism is a collection of external reflections on the Torah and Jewish history, where the rabbis have said something, and hopefully someone with a really good Jewish background may watch this and could point to me in the right direction. But I remember one of the stories that was reflected upon after one of the battles the Israelites had that they won. They routed the enemy, and they're all rejoicing and praising God and having a big party about it. And somebody sees God sitting on a rock just in the distance, and he's crying. And so they go over to God and say, "Hey, God, why don't you join in the party with us? This is a big day. You've helped us to win, and we're justifiably partying on down." And God, through his tears, says, "My people, my people." And I think this is a really good lesson for us who may be a bit pedantic in our own thoughts of salvation, that we've arrived and everything's judgment on the great unwashed, that God has created us all equally.
I think it might be a commentary on the crossing of the Red Sea,
Do you think?
because I've seen Seder meals that make reference to you are rejoicing, but I am crying.
But the unicorn song, it's probably extinct by now.
Oh,
Ba-bum-tish.
oh.
It can get worse.
And it does.
Well, we've got 15 minutes. Do you think we should stop it from getting worse? Any questions? Please leave them in the comments. Boo. Oh, take more than booing to stop me.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, so we're gonna quit for the day. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you have a great week and that you keep safe. COVID-19 sees no discrimination, no barriers. It is nasty whether you've been unvaccinated. It's very, very nasty to the point of death. If you are vaccinated, depending on your age and a lot of other circumstances,
It can be
very, very dangerous still,
yeah.
and you can still die. That doesn't mean that the vaccinations are a failure. They're doing what they were designed to do. It's just unfortunate that I wish I could use that quip that Vern used, but I can't.
No.
It's a bit rude, but it's on point regarding people who really, there is no reason for them not to be vaccinated, and it's more and more important that we do. For the sake of other people, goodness. If you worry about being tracked, well, please do get rid of your cell phone, because that is 100% tracking you. And I really can't, I wish I could get into the mind of people to try and understand and empathize with those who just refuse, but I can't, because as part of the quip, the other quip was, if the people in our day were having to fight against polio, they would be against that as well.
If Fox News existed in the 50s, we'd still be fighting against polio.
Yes, that's right. Kit, do you have your notes from today that you could send me? This was wonderful. Well, thank you. And I do, and I will. Thanks a lot. Well, until next week. Well,
Till Sunday.
Till Sunday, yes. We'll see some of you on Sunday. Have you anything else to add? No?
No.
Well, take care, and God bless.
God bless.